Hello, everyone, and welcome to class today. I hope you all, whether you're watching live with me or whether you are going to see this later through the video on demand, I hope you all get something out of this stuff. Again, really quickly, I just want to kind of explain the purpose of these live streams. We can cover the material, we can talk about things, I can do all that in a video. But what I don't get the opportunity to do is interact with you all, answer questions from you all. So with that sort of stuff, the live stream becomes sort of the perfect thing for what we do in class, So what I'd like to do first before we get into today's material is I would like to just talk a little bit more about some of the course orientation stuff. There's one thing in particular that I need to kind of call out before we get into stuff, just so you know about it now. But I walked you kind of through the course orientation stuff in our welcome video that I sent out late Sunday. So remember that all of the Begin Here module stuff is due by the end of day tomorrow. But I'm going to go into our Begin Here module now. But before I do that, let me just say the announcements, which is where we're at currently. The announcements are what gives us, or what gives you rather, the information that you need. So this is where you'll enter into the class. You'll also get copies of these announcements through emails. Embeds and things of that nature don't show up in your emails. They only show up in the announcements in the course. So if I post a video in an announcement or something like that, then you actually have to log into the Blackboard course to see it. But let's go ahead and move on from the announcements to the Begin Here section. So let me jump into Begin Here real quick. Reiterate a couple things. One is this enrollment verification activity. If you have not done that yet, please do that as soon as possible. That is what I use to verify your enrollment in the course. That's the first thing that you should do before you do anything else. And we need that. We need everything in the Begin Here module, this included, completed by the end of day tomorrow. We also have a bunch of information in here for you to read and kind of go over at your own time, including the syllabus. The syllabus breaks down all of the important course tidbits. I'm not going to bore you with syllabus right now, so you can kind of read that later. Instructor information, this is how you get in contact with me. I'm easiest to get in contact with via email, so you use your student email to contact me. I also have my student hours here. These are times when I will be in my office and available to you. If you don't want to come onto campus, we have some other options for you. What I like to use is Microsoft Teams. So I have this video here talking about Microsoft Teams and how you use that. It's really easy to use this to get in touch with me. So if you have a question, send me a message via Teams and I'll answer pretty much immediately if it's during one of my student hours, or I'll answer whenever I see the message if you message me outside of student hours. But I get these messages pretty quick and they're pretty obvious when I get them, so I answer fairly quickly. We have our pacing guide right here. These are our due dates for the entire semester, so you know right now when everything is going to be due. So we see here that I have all the modules listed. I have us a week break thrown into there since you don't get a fall break this year. And most other seated classes have at least one day off where they don't have to come. I thought it would be nice to throw you in a fall break just to have a week where nothing was due. So you could just take a break from the course. It's in roughly the same place where we had a break last year, so it's a pretty good spot to kind of chill. But that's what that is. And we have everything here due. The latest we can have stuff due is the final project, which is due by noon on December the 11th. And we'll talk about the final project in just a moment. But you know about your final exam and your final project right now. And those are going to be due December 11th. Which I should probably add /final project there. Information about the textbook, information about all of this stuff. We've got the Introduce Yourself discussion board and the orientation quiz. I've already seen some of you participating in the discussion board. Make sure you do that. I want to know who you are. And the orientation quiz, just to get us kicked off. All this begin here stuff due by end of day tomorrow. Now, really quickly, let's jump over to the final project, which I have for us here. So you know right now that a final project exists. And you know right now that the final project is a big project. This is a big project. So I tell you about it as early as possible so that you can start working on it as early as possible, because this is a big project, especially if you're going to do option number 4. You know, there's a lot of time and effort that you have to put in outside of the project itself to getting the project done. But I'm telling you now, for the final project, you have your choice of what you do. And we'll talk more about how to make a good one of these as we progress throughout the course. We'll talk about how to make a good... we'll talk about how to make a good instruction manual. We'll talk about how to make a good presentation for the purpose of training. But you have your choice of one of these options. The first one is a paper, right? A 13 to 15 page paper that answers this prompt. The second one is a 15 to 20 page instruction manual with a short reflection that goes along with it. The third one is a 25 to 30 slide training presentation. If you don't give the presentation, you have to write a longer paper to go with it, telling which, you know, the extra length goes into detail about how you would present this presentation. If you actually get the opportunity to do the presentation, then you have to do a much shorter reflection, because I can actually see you in action in terms of how you presented the presentation. And then finally, if you already work in a help desk scenario, or you already have a job in a tech support field, this is probably the best one for you, because this is just you actively doing the job that you already do and writing a little paper about what you do, what your experience is with calls and tickets and the things that you do in your everyday life. In the past, we have been somewhat successful with finding people opportunities if they want them to do some volunteer work in this sort of capacity. If you want to do that, you need to contact me as soon as possible so that I can try to find you a placement. Typically, we've had good luck working here with the help desk at Cleveland Community College. But again, whatever this would be most likely in a volunteer capacity, meaning there's no pay associated with that. And this final project is due by noon on the last day of class, which is December the 11th. So with that being said, if you have any questions about any of the orientation stuff or the final project, please get in contact with me. Otherwise, everything else is sort of there for you to read. So we're going to leave that be. And since we have Module 1 material being due this coming Sunday, September the 6th, I believe that is, we need to go ahead and get into some material. So let us get into this material. So what is this class all about? Let's start with that. What are we doing here? What will we be learning? What's going on here? So, what we have here is the course description of this class. You'll find it also in your syllabus as you're reading through that later on. But what this class is all about is basically summed up in the following. So this course introduces computer training and support techniques. Topics include methods of adult learning, training design, delivery and evaluation, creating documentation, and user support methods. So I have this center section highlighted here, or bolded here, methods of adult learning, training design, delivery and evaluation, creating documentation, and user support methods, because those are the big topics that we cover throughout the course. We will be doing all of these things. So upon completion, students should be able to design and implement training and provide continued support for computer users. So what we are doing here the big stuff are these methods of adult learning. We're going to get into that. We're going to talk about how we learn. So in that sort of way, this becomes a little bit of a psychology course. We're going to talk about training, design, delivery, and evaluation. So how do you create a training? How do you design a training? And how do you evaluate how well you did in presenting a training? We'll talk about making documentation. This includes both instruction manuals and working with tickets. And we'll talk about user support methods, how we support our users. So what is computer user support? What does this term mean? It might be kind of a vague term to you all as you're kind of looking at this presentation. What is computer user support? Well, we have a functional definition for computer user support here. Our functional definition for computer user support is a computer user support technician who is also known as a help desk technician or technical support specialist. There are tons of names for people that work in this field. So regardless of what we call them, they are people who assist customers and clients with issues arising from everyday computer use. And so if you're wondering, well, why would I want a job in computer user support? Why would I want to do tech support? Why would I want to do any of this? Well, let's have a look at some numbers. So what we have here is some data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. And we can see the growth in these support workers over the last 10 years, from 2010 to now in 2020. So in 2010, we had a need for 600,000 computer support specialists, which again, we could call those tech support specialists. We can call them whatever. In the last 10 years, we've seen a growth of 17% in this industry. We've moved from 600,000 workers to 700,000 workers. And just by the understanding of what you're looking at when you look at the state of technology and computer use in this country, or really in the world, we see that this need for computer support specialists, this need for tech support people, isn't going to go away. So this is going to be a job that is going to be present. It's going to be there. It's going to be something that you can get whenever. It's going to be relatively stable. We see the same thing with network support specialists. So if you're specifically focused on networking and troubleshooting a network, from 2010 we were looking at 345,000 workers, and in 2020 we're looking at 445,000 workers. Another 100,000 worker increase, this time to the tune of 28%. So that's fairly significant. Like, that's a big jump, and it should show us the need for all of this. And that need isn't going away. So what are some types of user support? We see all this stuff. We'll talk about all of this stuff in a bit more depth as we progress. But our first bullet here is something that you've probably done, and you've probably offered people user support and not even realized it. Peer support. This is just people helping people. It's informal. Like, your friend comes to you and says, hey, can you help me fix my computer? And you say, yeah, and you remove the viruses or whatever, and their computer works good again. This is not, a part of a business. There's typically no cash exchanging hands here. It's they might buy you a beer, buy you lunch to thank you, but there's no compensation. It's not a job. It's just you helping out another person. Oftentimes the first foray of people into a help desk career involves part-time support. So, I think we all have a relatively good understanding of what a part-time job is. So we can pretty much understand what part-time support is. You're not working a full 40-hour week. You're just working a certain number of hours, typically 15 to 20, maybe even 25, depending on the company. And at many companies, this might be the only type of support agents they have on their payroll, are these part-time supports, because some smaller organizations, they can't really justify the expense of a full-time support staff. They might have one or two people in a full-time role, and they back them up with part-time people. And it is a way to save money. And one of our goals later on in the course is going to be to talk about managing a help desk, managing various things in this sort of way, so we can kind of get an understanding of, well, what are the costs? What are the benefits? What are we kind of doing with who we have on staff? How do we decide how many people to hire? All that sort of fun stuff. In some workplaces, they might have a user support team. And we see this in a lot of places. These are typically people who have other jobs, other roles within the company. But then they also provide support services. So if we look at a company, they might have like a network analyst whose job is to keep the network up and running. They might have a information specialist whose job is to, secure the data and maintain the databases. They might have several of these higher level IT positions, but then as a part of their job, which is not their only job, they also do support services. This is a little more rare, especially these days, just because I think companies are starting to see value in having a specialized support service. But this is something that we have seen in the past. what you'll see the most often is our fourth bullet point here, the help desk. A single point of contact for users, both internal users and external users, which we'll talk about what those are, in need of technology support services. Now, some of the critical things about the help desk is we can have a help desk in many different forms. We can have a physical location help desk. We can have a telephone hotline help desk. We can be able to contact the help desk via an email, a website, or chat service, or we can have a combination of the three here. For example, the help desk at Cleveland Community College here has all three of these things. There's a physical location for the help desk in the library, so you could walk in the library and get help with the things that you need. You can call the help desk, or you can contact them via email. So a help desk can be a lot of different things. There's not just one thing that represents a help desk. But it's this but the key thing there is it's a single point of contact. It is the place where you go to get support services, technology support services. Whether it's somewhere you go physically, whether it's somewhere that you call and talk to them, whether it's somewhere that you email, it is the place that you go for that to happen. Now, we do have a few other types of user support services. One is a user support center or an information center. And so we can kind of consider the user support center to be the help desk, but more. Right? So our user support center or information center provides a wide range of support services to internal users. Right? So we're not just talking about problems here in terms of like fixes. We're talking about like, well, I need a place to go print. I need a place to go use a computer or use the internet for a little while. I need a place to do whatever with my device. Another thing that could be included in this is hardware repair. Actually replacing pieces of hardware in your current components. So we can think about a help desk in terms of our user support center. But our user support center is typically bigger. It typically involves more services. And so we can think about it in that sort of way. User support is IT responsibility. User support may be organized as a part of the information technology department. So you might have a subdivision within the IT department that is user support. But in this case, the difference here between this and what we had on the previous screen here with our work groups is that with user support as IT responsibility, what we're looking at is the primary responsibility of these individuals that are working in these roles is user support. However, they might be given some secondary opportunities as members of the IT staff. So it's kind of a reverse of that previous thing where we were talking about a support team. With the support team, they have a main role and then fulfill a secondary role. And when we're looking at this here, oftentimes it means that they're fulfilling support as their main role, and they might have a secondary role as a part of the organization. And then finally, user support outsourced to a vendor. So an organization contracts with a vendor to provide user support to internal or external users through a signed agreement. This is another thing that a company might do if they don't have a lot of cash on hand. Because typically these vendors that provide these services can work on lower margins because they're providing services to multiple companies. So then the organization itself doesn't have to worry about hiring people, scheduling people, paying benefits. You know, if they analyze their tech support needs and realize that the cost-benefit analysis says that it's probably a better idea to go with the outsourced vendor, then that's what we do. So let's talk a little bit about KSAs. And these are something that we'll also talk about later on. But there's something that we kind of need to understand at this point because we're going to be talking about them a lot. So KSA is an acronym. It stands for Knowledge, Skills, and Abilities. Knowledge, skills, and abilities. And we can find these KSAs in every single job description on the internet. If you see a position posted, if you know how to read it properly, you can find these KSAs in it. So let's break these down for a minute. Knowledge, the K. So knowledge is what a worker needs to know to be able to perform a job. This is their education, this is their degree, this is their certifications they might have, and a list of specific topics that they might know about. So this is what you need to know to do a certain job. On the other hand, skills are things that a worker must be able to perform to do a job. So this is expertise based on practice and experience. So that's the big difference between knowledge and skills. Because sometimes we might kind of conflate these, right? And kind of think of knowledge as a skill or skill as a knowledge and vice versa. When it comes to knowledge, it's what I know in my head, right? It's the things that I've studied. It's the things that I've read about. It's the schooling that I've had. But when it comes to skills, these are things that I've actually physically done, did them in the real world, have experience with them, know what I'm doing as a result. So you can kind of get some overlap here because based on your skills that you have, you can gain new knowledge. But the difference between knowledge and skills are basically things that you know theoretically versus things that you've done practically. And then finally, abilities. And these are functions that a worker can either perform or not. And these are kind of secondary functions. So like if I worked in networking, I might need to know how to configure a router. That would be a skill if I can configure a router properly. But an ability would be something that's special. It's kind of tangentially related. It's a good to have, but not necessary in order to do my job. So this thing here would be like a physical ability. Maybe you ideally want somebody who can move boxes around for you. So you want somebody who can be able to lift at least 50 pounds. Or maybe you work with a community that speaks a different language, and a large part of your client base is speaking a different language. So maybe you want someone who speaks Spanish to be a part of your team. These are not requirements to be able to do tech support well, but these are abilities that you can have that are an asset to you as a person in a tech support role. So let's kind of get into essentially why we need these people in the first place and look at kind of the history of how the need for tech support's come about and how it's kind of changed over time. So back in the mid-1900s, the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, the computer looked like this. This is the UNIVAC. And the UNIVAC here is, as you can see, filling up the entire room. So because these computers were so big, it led to, it basically meant that all computing was centralized. The computer is big, the computer is expensive, maybe prohibitively expensive. So in order to have this computer, we could probably only have one, maybe two of them at a certain location. And anybody that needed to use it had to come to it instead of it kind of being omnipresent. And even still, these computers were kind of hard to use too. So it required some specialized knowledge in being able to use a computer to even be able to utilize computers like this at all. But all of that was about to change in the 70s, but more so in the 80s and 90s. We saw a rise of what we now call decentralized computing, thanks to the personal computer. History took these giant computers, thanks to, silicon chip circuits, integrated circuits. We were able to move away from vacuum tubes into an integrated circuit. Computers went from big to small. And since computers were smaller and less expensive, this meant that we could take the computer and spread it out. More people could utilize a computer. We no longer had to do computing at one centralized location. And even today, we've gotten even more decentralized because of the cloud. We can move from computer to computer, and our data still follows us on OneDrive or Dropbox or Google Drive. So we can kind of see how this computer has gone from one thing that was in a specific place to something that's kind of ubiquitous. We carry a cell phone in our pockets all the time now, and we can look at our data wherever we're at. So this was a big deal for the rise of computer support services. Why did we want to decentralize? Well, one, there was a backlog of requests for new computer applications. Since there was only one computer, and that computer had to be reprogrammed every time you wanted to do a new application, there was a big queue, a big line for people who needed applications written so they could use the computer for their purposes. But if we decentralize it, if we give everybody computers, then each individual can have the software on their computer that they need to run processes. An increase in the number of knowledge workers. A knowledge worker, and we'll probably talk about this a little more in just a minute, are people who work with data. People at the bank, accountants, shipping and receiving managers that are taking inventory. These are people that are working with data. And because we've decentralized computers and given out the personal computer, we can have an accounting department at our business. We can have an HR department at our business. We can have shipping and receiving and inventory control at our business. And each of these different departments that work with this data can have their own systems to work with the data that they need to work with. The availability of inexpensive personal computers. So since computers got small and we got the integrated circuit, they got cheaper. I mean, still relatively expensive in terms of like modern standards, but if you're a business buying computers, it was way better than trying to buy a bunch of Univacs. The availability of inexpensive productivity software. The spreadsheet being one of the big first ones. You know, when the spreadsheet originally came around, that's one of the things that is considered by many to be the thing that kind of revolutionized computing in business. And the development of user-friendly graphical user interfaces. So now no longer did you have to be this specially trained person that needed to have this specific knowledge in order to use the UNIVAC. We've got a GUI now, and it makes everything more friendly to even your average user. So more people can use this computer because it's easier to use, cheaper, more friendly. Software is available, so on and so forth. Huge difference from the big computers of old. Now, here's a question for you to think about. If you're watching this video on the VOD, you can pause the video and maybe think about it a little extra time. For those of you who are here with me live, I'm going to try to give you a second here to try to come up with an answer yourselves. But blank computing utilizes a centralized infrastructure to store and process data remotely. This is something that we probably all use on a daily basis now, or at least many of us might use this. But I'll give you a few answers here to try to think of a few seconds here to try to think of an answer. So what this is cloud computing. Utilizes central infrastructure to store and process data remotely. OneDrive, Dropbox, Google Drive. You're storing that data, and you can take that data and process it remotely. This is cloud computing. So let's talk a little bit more about these knowledge workers that I mentioned earlier. So a knowledge worker is a person whose job involves handling or using information. And one of the most valuable things that we have is information. I mean, information is sort of the thing that, like, everybody wants to get nowadays. Like, there are people willing to break laws to get information. So if people are willing to break laws, if people are willing to commit crimes and go to jail, oftentimes for a long time, in order to get information, based on that alone, we can say that information is valuable. But we know it's even more valuable when we look at things like just business in general. The idea that businesses run nowadays on information, and there are whole businesses that are just dedicated to information. If I can run a multi-billion, multi-trillion dollar company, and the focus of that company is just working with information, again, information is valuable. So since a knowledge worker is a person who handles or uses information, and information is super valuable, then we can come to a conclusion then that knowledge workers have important jobs. So what does that mean for us as support technicians? Well, we've already kind of set it up, right? This idea of end user computing. Our knowledge workers are our end users. Our clients are our end users. And we've said that thanks to the proliferation in decentralized computing, that we now have the ability to have more people with computers, and the GUI, the graphical user interface, makes the computer easier to use. So because more people have computers, and these people don't have to have the specialized training in how to use and work with computers, that creates a new job field. Because these end users that we're working with oftentimes are knowledge workers. They're people who are doing a job with information, and that job's very specific. But what that job is not is computer support. They don't know how to fix their own computer. They don't know how to network, create a network, manage a network, install, might not even know how to install software. Because that's not their job, that's not their role, that's not their purpose. Their purpose is to work with the data, work with that information. So that's what creates this whole need for even having a field that's called computer user support. The fact that we have a litany of untrained individuals using computers to work with something that is incredibly important. Because for every minute a computer is down, for all the time that someone's not able to do their job because of some kind of technology issue, the business who employs them is losing money because that person cannot do the critical task that they normally do in working with information. And we can even take that and kind of put it on a personal user level. There are individuals who, if we're not talking about the context of business, if we're just talking about the context of personal use, people use their computers for a lot of stuff. They use their computers to contact loved ones. They use their computers to blow off steam from maybe a tough, stressful job that they have. There are a lot of different purposes for an individual to use a computer. And so when these users, who also aren't trained specialists, like we once had working with the UNIVAC and other large mainframe computers of that type, when these people have problems, they get frustrated because they can't do the things that they need to do. So that's what we've seen in the progress of computing, going from mainframe, centralized computing, to decentralized computing, to the even more decentralized computing of today. And it all revolves around the need for more and more computer support specialists, tech support specialists, whatever term you want to use for it. And as you get into your reading and you're doing your assignments for Module 1, one of the most important things that we do is we take these end users, we take these people that we serve, and we classify them. So you have a lot more information about this in your textbook. So as you're reading, make sure you pay extra special attention to how we classify end users. Because our end users are in a variety of environments, because computing is decentralized. They're not just in one location. They're in a variety of environments that have a variety of different needs. Some of our computer users know everything there is to know about the computer and might just be having one little frustrating issue. Some of them know absolutely nothing except for just what they do on a day-to-day basis. So to understand the variety of environments and situations in which organizations provide technical support to their knowledge workers, it's helpful to recognize the different types of end users. And so as we examine an end user, we find all of these topics here, all of these classifiers, incredibly relevant. What is the environment in which this user is in? What is the skill level of this user? How frequently do they use their computer? What kind of software do they use? What kind of features do they use in said software? And what is their relationship? And in terms of relationship, we're not talking about dating. We're talking about whether they're an internal user or an external user. Internal user means they're a part of the same company. They're an employee at the same company that is hired by the help desk. External user means that they work at a different company from where the person who works at the help desk works. So, for example, Cleveland Community College here, our help desk serves both internal and external users. The internal users are the people that work at the college, the faculty, the staff, the administration. The help desk serves them and makes sure all their technology is up and running perfectly. The external users would be you, the students. Because you're not employed by the same organization that employs the help desk individuals. So they can provide a different type of service for employees that they can provide for you. Because if I'm working at the help desk and I break a computer that belongs to the same company that I work for, well, we can easily replace it. But if somebody comes in from outside of my company with their own personal device and I break it, I'm in a lot more trouble. So again, as you read your textbook and you're going through this material, all of these classifiers are going to be extremely important. I don't like this going for, I don't like these live streams going for too long, but let me kind of cherry pick one or two of these before we go to talk about so that you can have a better understanding. Let's start out by talking about environment. So it's helpful to determine whether a user's primary use of computers occurs at home. So is it personal use or is it professional use? So are they primarily working with their computers at home? Are they primarily working with, or are they primarily working with their computer in a workplace scenario? What is the environment in which they do their normal computing? And oftentimes your users will fall into both groups, especially nowadays. Like when more modern companies, what they're doing is they're assigning a laptop to an employee or buying on a laptop for an employee when they start working with that company. And then that's the laptop that they use, and they use it in the office for business applications, and they take it home and use it at home for personal applications. So oftentimes, a user might fall into both groups in terms of environment here. So there's a lot of stuff that we do. Here's another one to cherry pick, features used. So you probably know, as you use software or as you use a computer, you don't use every single feature that's a part of a program. You might only use the basic features. You might use some advanced features. So if I'm developing a training or I'm offering someone support, I don't need to waste my time with advanced features if they only use basic features. I need to focus my efforts on those basic features. Now, we do have a name for people who take advantage of all the features in order to unlock the full power of their software. We call those people power users. So you can probably kind of understand how someone who is a power user has a different support need than someone who just uses a few basic features of a particular application. So with that being said, remember to do your textbook readings for Module 1. Remember to check out the material in the Module 1 Blackboard section. If you have any questions, please let me know via email or Teams, and I will respond to you as soon as possible. But once again, I like to keep these online live streams relatively short. I don't really like to go over more than like 30 or 45 minutes in general. Went a little longer today since we started with some course orientation stuff that we needed to talk about. But in general, I don't like to go any longer than about 45 minutes. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and wrap things up for today. Just make sure that you're working on your material that we have in Blackboard. If you have any questions, again, let me know. I'm going to turn the music back on for a minute. Sit in the online chat just to see if there's anything from anybody who's here in the live stream with me that they need. But with that being said, that's all for today. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.
Well, if you're wondering what's happened, So am I. The computer that we have running our news from time to time took off and went wild. So what we're going to do is start over from the top.